Quiet Riot. Hello, Quiet Rioters, and welcome to a special edition on the incredible political events taking place over La Manche in France. I'm Kenny Campbell, producer and the third occasional voice in the Quiet Riot stable, and I'll be joined by our favourite Chevalier to discuss what's happening on planet Le Pen after today's eye-popping criminal conviction and sentencing of Marine Le Pen. With us is Olivier Morel, who, as well as being a partner at law firm Cripps, is also an international trade expert, chairing the UK chapter of the Conseil du Commerce Extérieur de la France, which is a 125-year-old French government think tank on international trade. And he also sits on the board of the French Chamber of Great Britain. For those of you who don't know Olivier, he was appointed a Knight of the French National Order of the Légion d'honneur, which is France's highest order of merit, in recognition of his 30-plus years of voluntary work promoting Franco-British commerce, cooperation and friendship. Olivier is then very much one of us on Quiet Riot. Olivier, welcome, and thank you for joining us at such obscenely short notice.
Thank you, Kenny. What an introduction. What can I say? I'm delighted to be here, as always.
Before we dive into today's events, can I just ask, when you heard the Le Pen verdict, did you think, oh no, or did you let me grab the popcorn and just settle back for the drama?
It's probably somewhere in between. I wasn't massively surprised. This was obviously everyone was waiting for the news, but perhaps it might be helpful to remind everyone of why was she on trial. It's her and her party and a number of 10 or 12 or so of her colleagues were on trial in the first place.
Good. Well, let's do that. For listeners who haven't been following the drama closely, then here's a brief recap of the story arc up until now. So Marine Le Pen, between 2004 and 2016, Le Pen's far-right National Rally Party set up what turned out to be an extensive scam. What they were doing was taking money which was intended solely for European Parliament assistants and using it instead to pay staff who worked for its head office in France. The scam cost European taxpayers at least 4 million euros, which is not far short of 3.5 million quid. So not small beans. The French state prosecutor said Le Pen's party treated the European Parliament like a cash cow and had set up a highly organised war machine. That was the quote, to embezzle European funds, which were then used to illegally finance the cash-strapped party in violation of all basic rules. The trial lasted for 2 months, and during those 2 months, the court heard just how brazen the scam was. For example, in one email to Le Pen, a party worker who was supposed to have been employed as a parliamentary assistant for 4 months said, "I'd like to see the European Parliament, and that would also allow me to meet the member of the European Parliament I'm attached to." This person had never been to the European Parliament, where he was supposed to work. Another supposed parliamentary assistant made only one phone call to his member of the European Parliament in 11 months, and there weren't any documents to show that any work of any sort, of any relevance, took place. So the court was told that the party had showed, and I quote, contempt for public funds that came from the pockets of their own voters. Well, Le Pen, who is a former criminal lawyer herself, lest we forget, and her colleagues have paid a high price. She and 8 other MEPs were found guilty today of misappropriating funds, and 12 assistants also on trial were found guilty of concealing those funds. And just to bring the story sort of full circle, among the beneficiaries of the fake job scam was one Jean-Marie Le Pen, the party's late former leader and, of course, Marine's father. In terms of the punishment, and it's worth highlighting it because that was what really raised eyebrows today, while Marine Le Pen was storming out of the courtroom, the judge sentenced her to an automatic 5-year ban for running for public office, which takes her out of the upcoming presidential race. She was also fined 100,000 euros, which is about £82,000, and handed a 4-year prison sentence, which caused some gasps. 2 of those years will probably be spent with an electronic tag, and the other 2 will be suspended. So she won't spend time in prison, and she will appeal those sentences. But it's a huge fall from grace. So, Olivier, where on earth to begin? Obviously, we should begin with Marine Le Pen, who awoke on Monday with high hopes of high office and ended the day facing up to life as a convicted criminal with an electronic tag around her ankle. What does this all mean, do you think, for her political career?
That's a very good summary of a long and complex story. And I would add that she's not the only party and the only person to have been found guilty of misuse of European funds. Like in the UK Parliament, in the Parliament in Westminster, MPs get an allowance for paying their sort of assistants to do the work. And every now and then, as we know from the expenses scandal, that money has perhaps been misused. But also in none other than the current French Prime Minister, François Bayrou, his party, he was appointed by Emmanuel Macron, and literally a month afterwards, we're talking about back several years, he had a prominent ministerial job. He was forced to resign because he was under investigation, he and his party, for exactly the same charge. He was not guilty. I think there was lack of evidence, and it sounds as if he was simply, his party had done it was more inadvertent, shall we say, than disorganized system. Certainly that's what the court said. But this has happened before. And the second thing to add is, at the time, parties ran their own sort of payroll, as it were. It's now been reformed, and the European Parliament actually doles out the money to make sure that there is a sort of proper checks and balances. To come back to Marine Le Pen, I think there was a period, I'm told, she genuinely didn't think it would go that far. And I think as the trial progressed, I think it dawned on her that this was, a possible outcome. And I think today, I suspect, like anyone, but she would have been devastated. The thing which I think is a detail, but a very important one, on the sentencing. As the day approached, I think everyone was expecting her and her party to be found guilty. I think that became quite obvious because the facts were so, as you say, were so extreme, and the evidence, the paper trail, was so extraordinary that surely no judge could find otherwise. The very key point is whether the inability to hold public office, that bit of the sentence, was suspended until a possible appeal or was executive immediately. And that's the bit that created the shock, is the fact that even pending an appeal, that sentence was executed immediately. So she cannot run for 5 years, whether she appeals or not.
She's dead in the water, isn't she, as far as the elections are concerned?
Yes, I mean, the election is in 2 years. So she's going to appear tonight on sort of the main evening news. And I may be a hostage to fortune because we're a few hours away of that. But my expectation is, because I don't think she has much choice, she will probably double down on the, and you can see the political reaction is very predictable, which is her partisans are playing the martyr playbook, the systems against us, and surely would you want to have Viktor Orban and Vladimir Putin in your camp, issuing statements, not Putin himself, but the Kremlin and the Hungarian government issuing a statement in support, and the far right in Holland and Italy? That's in itself, I mean, seriously, do you? It's just.
There have been, I suppose, a few people on the other side of the political fence, the communists and such like, who've pulled their punches a little bit, saying, look, we fight our opponents at the ballot box. That's where the political fight should take place, not in courtrooms. So it's not quite as cut and dried as it might initially have seemed. But the point you make about not having friends like Geert Wilders, Viktor Orban and Matteo Salvini stands. I mean, with that in mind, though, does this in its own way cement her place in political history, whether she likes this to be the way that she goes down in history or not?
Yes, and you're also right to point out there are some nuances even in the last few days. I think people even on the Clément Beaune, who's one of what was a prominent minister of the cabinet until the last election, and a centrist, and I think he hails more from the left side of the political spectrum, was himself saying that he was uneasy with judges, that was before the verdict, but judges potentially having a say on whether someone can stand or not. Others have been more forthright since the verdict's come out. Mr. Wauquiez, who sees himself, like a few others, as the leader of the Conservatives, has said quite unambiguously he thinks that, judges should not be the sort of arbiter of this kind of thing. And others on the far right have been more vocal. So I think there are nuances. I think it hinges on this. It's this ability to decide whether someone should be able to stand or not, and whether that's suspended or not. Because it in this case, although it's normally a detail, in this case, it's quite an important fact. I mean, my personal take, and I was going to add at this point that I speak for myself and not of the organization that you've mentioned. The law is the law, and to accuse judges of, I mean, both sides of the political spectrum accuse judges of being biased whenever a case doesn't go in their favor, or there are politicians who do that anyway. I think, I'm afraid, the law is the law, and Marine Le Pen herself and her party were very vocal until recently about being, that the law was too laxist and that you should have maximum severity for criminals. Well, as one MP said, if the MD of a company had embezzled that kind of money, of course they would be punished and they would be going to jail, or at the very least have a kind of electronic tag. So why should there be a rule for some people and not for others? So I'm quite kind of black and white in this. I think, I mean, there's also a nuance into people call it a political judgment. I don't think it is. I think it's a judgment that has political ramifications. Of course it has. It'd be silly to say it is, but it is not a political judgment. And to hear a Russian communique have a go at the sort of French democracy, and this is an attack on democracy. I mean, this is quite extraordinary. But this is a playbook of the Trumps of this world, called black, white, and or J.D. Vance in Munich, attacking Europe for meddling with free speech when there were Russian interference in the Romanian elections. Everyone knows that. So anyway,
and I mean, lest we forget, I mean, Marine Le Pen knows the law very, very well. She's a trained lawyer. She was a public prosecutor for a large part of the 6 years that she was practicing law. So she knows not just the price that could be paid, but she knows the importance of the rule of law as well, doesn't she? There's no excuse, in other words, is there?
Correct. And it's interesting that the French radio have been, I mean, the scientific value of this is not, but they were doing sort of like, street polls of people, just what's your reaction? They had young students in Lyon, in the large city outside of Paris. Students who were coming out of lectures, some law students, others from there. And all of them were like, you've done something wrong when you're punished. And it's kind of like, this is what it's something quite fun. Sometimes it sounds a bit basic, but it's not. It's actually quite refreshing. And I think some of them were saying that after the disrepute in which the political class is being held, that, they're not above the law. They just have to follow the rules.
I mean, it's reassuring or disappointing, I suppose, depending on one's take and how much entertainment we want to get out of this, because France isn't afraid of a bit of protest, let's face it.
Quiet riot. Quiet riot.
As a lot of commentators have said that this will predictably play into the hands of National Rally, that they'll play the victim card and garner even more support. But I mean, from what you've said, from other experiences in Europe, actually, it's not a given, is it? I mean, for example, Golden Dawn in Greece surged to prominence in the wake of Greece's financial crisis in 2009. They were hit with criminal investigations, criminal trials against the leaders, and they've collapsed into obscurity. So despite this idea that a lot of people are saying that Le Pen and her party could benefit from the severity of this sentence, it's not necessarily a given, is it?
I think this is the typical short-term populist, You have a surge. It's here me being the optimist, but I think there is always a short-term surge. And those of us who believe in a different kind of politics hope that shortly there will be a comeuppance. People who do something wrong will be found out. Here is me being super naive, and
I'll be back to you in 6 weeks' time, and I'll just be laughing and pointing my finger.
Well, there we are. But I think that's the difficulties. These things are not measured. It takes a long time. I mean, I'll take perhaps a parallel that may be seen inappropriate by other people, but you look at what's happened with the Vichy regime in France.
Right.
In 1940, obviously, you wouldn't have put a cent or a franc or a penny on the De Gaulle and those others that sort of started to resist. It took 4 years for the whole thing to collapse. And when people turn around and actually look back and look at what happened over that period, they're absolutely aghast that when Parliament in 1940 gave Pétain the full powers, there was a massive majority for him. There are a few that couldn't make it to the Parliament because of obviously there were either not there or prisoners or fighting. But there are only something like 70 or 80 who voted against. Parliament was about 600 or 700 seats at least. So there was an overwhelming majority of all sides, which at the time went with the tide. And it took a long time for people to come to terms with what had happened and for the tide to turn. So I think it's going to necessarily take time. Maybe it's me speculating again here, but there was a calculation by some that you have to allow this party to be in power for it to be found out.
Right.
They very cleverly play I just sit by the sideline and throw stones. They've never been really tested in power. They have some local authorities are under their control, but they've never been tested at a national level. And therefore some say it's a shame because actually it would have been the way. But that's a heavy gamble and a heavy price to pay to say, here are the keys, show us you can't do it.
I mean, with that in mind, for the party to achieve high office of any sort, of course, it does need a new star. The hot favourite at the moment to replace Le Pen, their plan B is Jordan Bardella, who's only 29 years old, isn't he? He's not what you would call hugely experienced, but he is president of National Rally, so he's climbed the greasy pole very, very quickly, and he is favourite to step into Le Pen's formidable shoes. What else do we know about him, and do you think that France believes he's got what it takes to operate at the very highest echelons of politics?
No, I don't think so. If she's indeed unable to stand, I think it could trigger, it's not for the first time it's happened, a sort of battle within the party, a fight for the top where, of course, several people think they can do the job instead of her. And I think this is why I'm saying that I think she's going to try and double down and say, well, the appeal can be held, within the 2 years, which would be an extraordinarily speedy resolution. I suspect she's going to try and do this, but I also suspect there will be the start of some infighting in the party. People who have already questioned him. I mean, I think he's a great kind of TikTok, short, snappy slogans. But when it comes to discussing in-depth topics and heavyweight, in terms of a heavyweight political figure, he's not yet there. His age play a part, but there are young people who are very, very good, but he simply hasn't got the experience and what it takes. I think he's not shown any evidence of it so far anyway. So my conclusion is that there will be some trouble inside the party, and that's probably why she's going to try and I mean, her authority is now seriously damaged, of course.
That's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, will inevitably become an obvious point of focus for all her political opponents, that whatever the political impact of today's verdict is, the harsh truth is actually her own party are likely to do at least as much damage themselves anyway. It's just the nature of politics, isn't it?
Yes, and there were, as I say, it's not the first time. The succession of her father created, there were people splitting off and trying to go off, and do National Front Mark II. It sort of never worked. They always managed to, she managed she's done I suppose within her own kind of logic and system, she's done well of, she's taken the party extremely far. She fell at the last hurdle. The party fell at the last hurdle in the last parliamentary elections because they were way ahead at the first round, and in the second round, when it came to for the electorate to have a stark choice between her party and someone they might not like but who wasn't, they went overwhelmingly with the other side, and they were stopped quite a long way short of what they thought they could achieve. There's that more fundamental issue. You've got these 9 or 10 million electors. You can't just dismiss them. You can't do a Hillary Clinton and say, "Oh, Trump voters are idiots," or words to that effect. This is just arrogance, and these people have real concerns. You have to be able to address them.
That's right, and that's something that applies in this country. Applies in a whole lot of countries, and of course, what's happening in France surfaces this, but it's not the first time it's surfaced. Even this year, globally, let's face it. What does it mean for France, sort of taking a step back and in the bigger picture? Does it actually mean anything for France?
On a sort of the electoral agenda and short term, probably nothing at this stage. I mean, it's massive news. There's no getting away from it. I think the Prime Minister a few days ago expressed he was slightly concerned that this might, trigger some unrest because her partisans might, as you say, France is no stranger to quite violent, sometimes public demonstrations. So you could have that. In terms of the functioning of the state, I don't think it does. We still have a government that is kind of, as we know, surviving sort of week by week. Will there be a vote of no confidence? What it might mean, and I haven't thought about it in any depth, is because, as we know, because she has a very large party in parliament, she sort of holds the key. She was rumored, and it turned out to be true, to hold the keys to Michel Barnier's premiership. And the moment she went with thumbs down, he lost the vote of no confidence. So God knows what, as a sort of reaction to this kind of news, she might be tempted by chaos. So I suppose I'm going to say the reverse of what I've said. No, it doesn't mean anything. I think one of the options, I suppose, it could be that they go for this kind of, loss for loss. We'll just create chaos and hope that in the chaos we can sort of pull something for ourselves out of the chaos.
Again, a recognised political playbook in 2025,
Yes.
Isn't it? Very, very cool. I mean, and on an individual, on her own personal level, I was going to ask whether or not you think she can come back from this, but actually looking at it, she's not going to go away, is she? Her role may change, but as an individual, she's here.
No, you're right, and French politics is really different from English or American politics. Although I suppose Trump as a comeback is a relatively new phenomenon. I mean, in the US, once you've been a candidate and you failed, you just go back to whatever you were doing. In UK politics, the same. I mean, if you've been leader of the party, I suppose David Cameron and Ed Miliband are two that have kind of kept. David Cameron was brought back. That was slightly artificial for a short stint as FCDO. Ed Miliband, to be fair to him, has stuck to his brief and carries on. And I think for that, I'm told he's quite popular within the party because he's done the job as leader. Anyway, in French politics, it's quite different. Those people that have been elected to the top job have had several go at it. Mitterrand had 3 goes. Chirac had several goes. Sarkozy and Hollande only had 1 go, and Macron. But it's not unknown for the French political class to continue, as you say, to be there and carry on and come back. So you're right. I think her name and her type of politics is currently she's surfing on a wave of sorry, that's a sort of truism, populism, but it's obvious the wave she's created, and so I don't think she'll go away. No, I agree. I wouldn't even be surprised if having gone through the whole process of appealing, winning or losing, whatever, she's still there. And still plays a part because by French political standards, she's not very old.
No, she's not. And I mean, she's still got opportunities that run in parallel with, if she steps back even a little bit from politics, there's a potentially great career as an angry right-wing YouTube commentator. She could make a great deal of money legitimately. It's not something that would entirely surprise me at all. In fact, I'd be surprised if somebody isn't on the phone to her right now saying, okay, we've got a business proposition for you, Marine. You've got a couple of years when you might be kicking your heels a little bit. Let's get in here, put the headphones on, pull the microphone up, and let's make tens of millions of euros.
Quiet, Riot. I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
Quiet, Riot.
Is it good for France? In other words, we've seen, the rule of law is upheld. The question is, of course, at what cost? We have that tension between the legal system and the political system, which of course is, there's a PhD in that. Is this sort of thing good for France? In other words, is the fact that it's been surfaced and we're getting to see what goes on behind the scenes actually something that we should lean into and say, yeah, this is a positive outcome. It was an unpleasant episode, but it's not a bad thing that it's happened.
Yes, I would agree with that. You may say, you may get very cynical and say, well, everything is rotten and therefore what's the point? Well, actually, no, I think it's really important that these kind of principles, people said during the whole turmoil of the sort of post referendum and, the prime minister whose name I shall not mention, suspending parliament and lying to the sovereign, this is quite extreme. This is someone who hasn't had his comeuppance, by the way, but that you can quote me on that. There's been inquiries. There's been at least Marine Le Pen has been found herself in a court of law and has been found guilty. So
yes.
I think there is and it was refreshing to hear there were a couple of law students interviewed. As I say, it's not scientific, but they came up with a kind of, well, this is what we learn, and you could say, oh, this is a bit naive and basic. Well, that's important. This is, you do something wrong and you just are punished.
I mean, I suppose from the perspective of her political opponents, there must be some doubt as to whether they're happy about what's happened today, because she's got the brightest of spotlights globally shone on her now. She's never been one to hide in the shadows, of course, but today, she's been dominating the headlines despite what's happening in America, despite the various wars, despite the disasters and earthquakes and things that are happening around the globe. I mean, she's, if not basking, she's certainly enjoying a moment in a very, very bright global spotlight. So if you were one of her political opponents, would you be happy with the way things have panned out today?
Yeah, I'm sure some of her opponents are happy or not happy. I think you have a point that you might say this plays in the hand of the kind of populist playbook, because it's, again, and she's playing at this sort of, being a victim. Look at this, the system is against me. I can see, from the comments you hear, not surprisingly, the sort of socialists and centre left and centre right tend to be approving of the outcome, and others, not surprisingly, particularly on the right of the political spectrum, play the outrage card and the denial of democracy and all that kind of thing. If I were an opponent, I'd have all these running. I mean, I've given my view, so I'm neither a supporter nor an opponent. I'm not playing that in her arena. I guess, yes, that would cross their mind, that she's achieved, I suppose unwillingly, but she's achieved this prominence, and it does play in the hands of the populists. Let's see whether Trump, when he wakes up, he has woken up now, whether I don't know whether he'll say anything or not, or one of his, he might get one of his sidekicks, to Mr. Vance, his attack dog, to say something.
I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, the big question now, of course, is what happens next. And sometimes we would look at a situation like this and wait for a country to pull itself apart, politically or otherwise. Other times it would be a big shrug of the shoulders and say, it's a very localized drama. Once the excitement is past, normal service will be resumed. But the truth is probably somewhere in between. Le Pen, personally and via her party, still does have a huge amount of support. So it's hard to see that it wouldn't have some impact on France when we think about what happens next. I dare say the question is just, how big is it? And will there actually be a change, or will it just appear to be a change because France has already seen the political tides changing in Le Pen's favour in the last 20 years, I suppose?
Yes, I think it will. I think you're probably, that's probably a good summary, is that in some respect that there's a big upheaval today, because it is big news. Of course it is. You can't deny that. And then we'll return to sort of not quite business as usual. The question remains, as I said, of these 9 or 10 million electors. Someone said many years ago, and I think it's a good summary, she or her father before her, the party raises the right questions, but brings the wrong, they bring the wrong answers to it.
One last question then, Olivier. If you had a chance to make a quick phone call to Marine Le Pen today, is there anything that you would say to her, or a question that you would like to ask? Throwing that question on you without any warning, haven't I? I can see you thinking.
Thank you. Thinking, Kenny, how could you? I would say, ma chère consoeur, which is, that French lawyers call each other confrère or consoeur, which is a very old-fashioned way, yes, with each other. I would try, I suppose, to call, again, being incredibly naive, I guess, try call upon her sense of kind of, higher duty and what is best for the country. But I think my worry is that her, and she's not the only one, have long passed that stage. They're so obsessed with their own role, or possible or likely or actual role, that there are very few of those politicians around that genuinely, follow a higher standard and say, yes, this is good for the country. And you probably can count them on the fingers of one hand.
The fingers of one finger.
Yeah. Yes. Not quite. Yeah.
It's a bit unfair.
That's what I would say. I would try, I would simply say, surely you must realize that, and she probably hasn't. The problem is she's well beyond that.
I do wonder.
I'm just finishing on that. I think the rumor had it at the start of the trial. She was absolutely convinced she was going to be found innocent. And I think she was genuinely shocked then when it dawned on her a few days ago that it might not go the right way. And then as the judgment was read, that was it. It was well beyond anything she thought possible.
It's that idea of immortality, isn't it? Politicians, I think, a lot of the time believe they're politically immortal as well, until such times as political equivalent of death knocks on their door and says, no, you're not immortal. You're subject to the same rules as everybody else. I do wonder whether she'd be an interesting person to go for a glass of red wine with or not, whether she would just bang on about stuff or whether she'd be properly good fun.
I'm trying to be optimist here. I suspect if she doesn't go into her politics, it may well be she's good company. I have no idea. I do not wish to find out. If I had a list of the 10 people I least want to spend a desert island type thing, I think she would be firmly somewhere at the top of the list. So
she's achieved something else with her political life in that case. Congratulations, Marine Le Pen. Well, that seems like a very good place, appropriate place to end the conversation today. I dare say that we'll be wanting to talk to you over the next few weeks because this isn't going to die, is it?
No.
This is going to carry on until the next
Yes,
election.
And I think it would be interesting, and I've said before, to do a kind of deep dive in European far right movements or indeed in the world, the populist, Holland and Germany with the AfD and Italy, of course, and Hungary and France.
That's an entire series right there. That's
correct.
Not a 40-minute chat, is it? That's exactly. Fabulous. Listen, Olivier, I always appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and wonderful to get your insight. Thank you once again, and hopefully we shall speak to you again soon.
My great pleasure. Thank you, Kenny.
Quiet Riot. Well, thank you, Quiet Rioters, for tuning in for that. Always insightful and always a fascinating individual to talk to, Olivier. He's really one of my favourite guests. This topic isn't going to go away anytime soon, and don't be surprised to hear about it in the weeks, months, and probably years ahead as well. If you've been enjoying our content, of course, please don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a review. Follow us on Blue Sky, which I'm told is now a better source for journalists than X. Finally, the tide has turned on that particular corner of the social media world. So do follow us on Blue Sky. And if you can support us on Ko-fi, that's ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod, then we are always appreciative for any help you can give. It keeps this little show on the road. Lots of love. Tune in for a regular show at the end of the week and keep rioting quietly. Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangita. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Soundstone Global.
Quiet Riot.